Chapter 1. The Burning of Herig. The first screams tore through the stillness of dawn like blades through silk. The sleepy hamlet of Herig, nestled along the northern edge of Midden, stirred under a pale violet sky, its cobbled lanes slick with dew and soot from hearth fires smoldering in hearths. Chickens squawked, dogs barked, but then came the second scream, wet, gurgling, and the village truly woke. Elias Krieg, all of 11 winters, jolted upright from his straw bed. His breath steamed in the cold, his bare feet crunching across the dirt floor as he stumbled toward the window of his family's cottage. He pushed the wooden shutter aside just enough to peer out. The first thing he saw was fire. Not a simple blaze, but hungry flames crawling like serpents along thatched roofs, spitting sparks into the sky. Then came the shadows, figures moving unnaturally fast, cloaked in torn robes that hissed as they moved, like the whispering of dead leaves. One paused, turned, and Elias saw her. A woman, if she could still be called that, with eyes black as coal pits, her mouth stretched into a grin of crooked teeth. Her arms were marked with blood-soaked runes that pulsed and glowed like molten veins. She raised her hands, and a swirl of sickly green fire bloomed from her palms, twisting into the shape of a screaming face before it was hurled into another home. The blast shattered timber and bone alike. Elias stumbled back. "Mother! Father!" he cried, spinning on his heel. His mother was already at the door, clutching a dull kitchen knife, her knuckles pale. His father had a smith's hammer in hand, all he had time to grab from the forge. They looked at Elias with the hollowed calm of people already praying to Sigmar. "Go to the root cellar. Don't come out, no matter what you hear," his father said, voice low and firm. "But—" His mother gripped his shoulder. "Elias, go!" The door exploded before she could finish. A rush of wind and ash hit them like a wave, and through it stepped another witch, male, tall, skin blistered with open sores, his mouth stitched closed with iron wire. He raised a charred staff crowned with a cracked skull. The skull opened its jaw and screamed. Everything became sound and light. The air itself seemed to cry out as the blast hit. Elias was flung backward, landing hard against the stone wall. His vision swam. His mother flew in the opposite direction, her head hitting the hearthstone with a sickening crack. Blood spread like ink across the floor. His father roared, swinging the hammer, but the staff struck first. It split his chest open like rotten wood. The witch laughed, a sound that came not from his mouth but from inside Elias's skull. It felt like spiders crawling across his brain. The smell of burned flesh and hot iron filled the room. Elias couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The witch stepped toward him, reaching out with long skeletal fingers. And then he stopped, froze. A sound, like thunder wrapped in a hymn, boomed outside. The witch turned. The front of the cottage vanished in a cascade of holy light and splinters. A figure stepped through the wreckage, haloed in golden fire. He was a mountain of a man, armored in black and gold, his cloak tattered but lined with silver Sigmarite scripture. A twin-tailed comet was etched into his breastplate. His face was lined with age and ash, his eyes burning with righteous fury. In one hand he held a warhammer taller than Elias, in the other a burning torch crowned with the sacred flame of cleansing. "Back, spawn of darkness." The priest spoke with the voice of judgment. The witch shrieked, tried to summon another blast, but the priest moved faster. The hammer came down in a wide arc. Bone shattered. The witch screamed as his skull caved inward, his body flung through the far wall in a spray of dark ichor and fire. The priest turned to Elias. "Boy, can you walk?" Elias stared. He couldn't answer. The man strode to him, lifted him as though he weighed nothing, and stepped back into the inferno. All around, Herig burned. Witches danced in circles of fire, laughing as they slaughtered. Villagers were crucified on pikes of writhing wood. Babies screamed from within wicker baskets set aflame. Above it all, a storm of unnatural colors twisted the sky, tendrils of warp lightning streaking across the horizon. The priest waded through the madness, each strike of his hammer another witch sent screaming into oblivion. Holy scripture flew from his lips like daggers. His torch held the unholy at bay. Behind him, Elias clung to life, pressed to the armored back of his savior. When dawn truly broke, Herig was gone. Only ash, broken stone, and burnt corpses remained. The priest laid Elias down beside the smoldering ruins of the village gate. He removed his helmet and knelt beside the boy. "You are the only one left." Elias looked at him through bloodied eyes. "Who are you?" "My name is Father Alldorf, a servant of Sigmar." He pressed a blessed pendant into Elias' trembling hand. "You are not done, child. Your story begins here." As Krieg closed his eyes, and the fire burned on in his dreams. Chapter 2. Raised by Fire and Faith. Elias Krieg awoke to pain. It was a constant thing now, dull aches in his ribs, the itch of healing burns on his arms, the ghost twitches of muscles that still remembered running from fire. But worse than the pain was the silence. Gone were the screams. Gone was the smell of his mother's hair, the warmth of his father's arms. Only the cold stone walls of the monastery remained. The fortress of the silver flame, they called it. Tucked deep within the black-clawed mountains east of Midden, it was less monastery and more fortress, prison, hewn from obsidian rock and ringed with iron sigils. Its walls were etched with prayers to Sigmar, sunburst comets, and runes designed to burn the skin of demons with their mere presence. Candles burned in every hall, never extinguished. Here there was no comfort, only purpose. Father Alldorf had brought Elias through the northern passes, cradled in blood-stained arms. The boy had barely spoken in days, but when asked if he wished to live, truly live, he nodded. That was enough. The Order of the Silver Flame took him in, though not without resistance. "Here is the mark of trauma, perhaps even witch sight," one brother had warned. "The only mark that matters is the will to resist," Alldorf had answered. So Elias became an initiate. He trained under Brother Magnus, a hulking man with a voice like gravel and a nose long since broken. Magnus made no apologies for cruelty. He believed pain taught more than words ever could. The first year was blood and blisters. Elias learned the weight of a flamberge blade before he learned to write. His fingers bled from carving purity's sigils into iron. He was forced to kneel and salt until his legs went numb, reciting every verse of the Hammer of Heretics. They taught him to hunt. He learned how to track the footprints of mutants through bog and brush, how to identify the sigils of the dark gods hidden within graffiti, how to recognize false prophets from genuine miracles. He was taught to be judge, jury, and executioner in lands where justice bowed to fear. His first kill was not a man, but close. The creature had once been a priest of Verena, or so the records said. Now it crawled on all fours, eyes eaten away by its own sin, skin covered in blistered runes. It hissed blessings to Tzeentch as Elias drove the stake through its chest. He vomited afterwards. Brother Magnus spat on the corpse and said, "You get used to it." But alongside the blade and book, Elias learned to think. At night, when the fortress grew cold and the brothers whispered prayers into the stone, Elias crept to the library. There, beneath shelves heavy with forbidden texts, he read. He found inconsistencies in the scriptures, words twisted over centuries, heresies that were once truths. Entire villages condemned because they honored Sigmar in a dialect different from Alldorf's. He read the annals of Alldorf, in which a priest had burned 1,000 children to purge a famine. He read about witch hunters who turned on each other, about towns saved by hedge witches only to be slaughtered afterward in the name of cleansing. Doubt crept in, not a wildfire, but a slow, cold drip behind his skull. Then came the trial. At 17 winters, he stood robed in white before the High Council of the Order. The rite was simple, a trial of judgment. Each initiate was given a case, an alleged heretic, often brought in chains. They were to question, interrogate, and, if necessary, execute. Elias Heretic was a boy no older than 10. They said he had dreams, visions of things that came true. He once foretold his mother's death. Once he screamed and birds fell dead around him. The villagers branded him a daemon's whelp. The boy was terrified. He flinched at every movement, sobbed into his wrists, which had been bound so tightly the skin was purple. Elias stared at him, hands shaking. He asked questions. The boy didn't even understand most of them. He only begged to go home. Elias stepped outside the cell. Father Aldrich waited. "You know what must be done," the priest said. Elias clenched his jaw. "He's just a child. He doesn't even understand what's happening to him." That is precisely when chaos strikes. It offers comfort when the world offers pain. There's no proof he's tainted. "There's never proof," Aldrich replied coldly. "Only signs. That is our burden. We judge so others don't have to." That night, Elias brought the boy food, bread, water, a clean cloth for his wounds. The next morning, the cell was empty. Their brother was found dead, throat slit, the boy gone. Elias bore 10 lashes for the betrayal, and though his back bled for days, he never screamed. Father Aldrich said nothing. He only watched Elias more closely after that. The following month, Elias passed his trial. He was anointed in blessed oil, given the sigil of the silver flame to wear upon his chest. The warhammer was placed in his hands. And as he stood before the altar of Sigmar, Elias Krieg looked into the flame and saw not purity, but hunger. Not all who burn are cleansed. Some are simply ash. Chapter 3. Shadows Beneath Alddorf. Alddorf, capital of the empire, seat of the Grand Theogenist, and supposed bastion of Sigmarite purity, was rotting from the inside. Elias Krieg could smell it. Not the stench of smoke or sweat that clung to the crowded streets, nor the stink of horse dung or the sour piss that puddled in alleys. No, this was something older, deeper, a musk of grave dirt and forgotten sins, the scent of necromancy. He moved like a shadow through the city's underbelly, his boots barely making a sound on the wet flagstones. Beneath the grandeur of marble cathedrals and banners snapping in the breeze, the undercity sprawled like a cancer, abandoned crypts, sewer channels, half-collapsed tunnels once used by smugglers and revolutionaries. His contact, a terrified rat-catcher with a twitching eye, had whispered of strange sounds beneath the temple of Sigmar, of chanting in dead languages, of pale-skinned priests who never walked by day. Most of the order dismissed it. Peasant hysteria, one scoffed, rats and echoes. But Elias had learned long ago that rats saw more than most nobles. He followed the old aqueduct past broken iron grates, lantern in one hand, sword sheathed but fingers ready. Every few steps he'd stop, press his hand to the damp stone, listening. The air grew colder. Not the chill of night, but the oppressive, smothering cold of death magic. The first sign came in pieces. A trail of bones lay across the corridor floor, small and brittle. Bird bones, maybe, but they were arranged, spiraled outward like some grotesque sigil. Elias stepped over them, knelt to examine the center. Blood. Not fresh, but not old either. It hadn't come from a bird. He pushed onward. The passage narrowed, the walls slick with moss and age. Up ahead, a faint orange glow flickered behind a broken doorframe, the hinges rusted to powder. Voices murmured in rhythmic tones, too synchronized for ordinary speech. He drew his flamberge and crept closer. Through a crack he saw them. A circle of robed figures stood around a stone slab. Their garments bore no emblems of the ruinous powers, no eight-pointed star, no mark of Nagash or Nehekara, but there was no mistaking the blackness of the relic they surrounded. A skull, large and crusted with dried blood, sat atop a pedestal of obsidian. Carvings writhed across its surface, scripts not meant for mortal tongues. The leader, a tall man with white hair and eyes sunken deep into his sockets, held a dagger forged of bone. His voice echoed through the crypt. From dust we rise, from blood we remember. In death we are made eternal. Elias watched as another man, a young acolyte, barely 20, was dragged forward. He screamed, pleaded. "Please, I was promised knowledge. You said I'd be spared." The priest offered only a thin smile. "Knowledge demands sacrifice." The dagger plunged into the boy's chest. Blood sprayed in arcs across the stone, hissing as it touched the skull. The air screamed. That was enough. Elias kicked the door open. "By the hammer of Sigmar, you are judge." The cultist recoiled. Some screamed. The high priest turned, blood dripping from his hands, and snarled. "Who dares?" "Your executioner," Elias growled and charged. His blade sang through the air, severing the first cultist's head in one clean strike. The corpse flopped like a fish on stone. Another swung a rusted axe. Elias parried, shoved him back, and crushed his knee with a brutal kick. The third drew symbols in the air, magic flaring between his fingers. Elias hurled his lantern. Glass shattered. Flame erupted across the robed man's face. He fell screaming, clutching at melting skin. The high priest raised the bone dagger, whispering to the skull. Dark tendrils burst from the pedestal, black vines of shadow and bone, shrieking with the voices of the dead. One coiled around Elias's arm, searing flesh. Another stabbed into his thigh. He roared in pain, dropped to a knee, then rammed his blade through the shadow root. It shrieked like a woman drowning. He lunged forward. The priest screamed. A word in some ancient tongue, and the skull began to glow. "Oh!" Elias spat. He flung a throwing dagger into the priest's shoulder, then surged forward and drove his flamberge through the man's gut, pinning him to the slab. Blood sprayed his face. The priest coughed once, then slumped, whispering something about the king beneath the crypt. The relic began to pulse. Elias grabbed the obsidian skull, ignoring the voices that clawed at his mind. Every instinct screamed to destroy it, but some darker whisper told him that smashing it would only unleash whatever it held. Instead, he wrapped it in a blessed shroud soaked in sanctified oil, sealing the voices. He limped out of the crypt, sword bloody, cloak torn, skull bound in chains. When he emerged into the temple's lower sanctum, the priests above stared in shock. None spoke as he climbed the stairs, each step leaving drops of blood in his wake. Outside, Alldorf bustled in the midday sun, oblivious to the horror that had pulsed just beneath their feet. Elias didn't speak of what he saw, not yet. But he kept the skull, locked in a sigil-warded chest, deep beneath a fortress of the silver flame. Something told him he'd be seeing it again. Chapter 4. Blood in the Catacombs. The nobleman had died with a smile. That alone was enough to rattle Elias. Baron Emil von Traken was known across Alddorf for his cruelty. A petty tyrant with a taste for violence, whose dungeons were rumored to echo with the screams of the innocent and guilty alike. Men like that didn't smile in death. They gurgled. They clawed at nothing. They begged. But von Traken had been found sitting upright in his bath, mouth stretched in bliss, neck opened ear to ear like a second grin. Blood painted the marble like a lover's art. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, just serenity and red. The strangest part? He wasn't the first. Elias had followed the pattern, 4 noblemen in 12 days, all found dead in private rooms, all surrounded by blood and roses, all wearing the same grotesque smile. The last thing each had done before dying was spend a night with a mysterious new courtesan, dark-haired, pale-skinned, unregistered with any brothel guild. They called her Lilith, and none could describe her face the same way twice. Elias found her scent before he found her. It clung to the catacombs like perfume soaked in rot, a sweet, sickly aroma, jasmine and decay. He moved through the tunnel, torch high, sword low, every footstep echoing like a whisper against the carved stone. These catacombs beneath the Traken estate were older than Alldorf itself, carved by ancient hands and forgotten cults. Symbols lined the walls, eyes without faces, tongues wrapped around daggers, the iconography of Slaanesh. He descended deeper. The stone changed, no longer shaped by tools, but twisted by unnatural force. It wept, pulsated slightly, like breathing skin. He heard moaning. At first he thought it human, pleasure, pain, something between, but the sound never paused for breath. It slithered across the walls, a wet chorus of whispers and gasps that made his skin crawl. Then he saw her. Lilith stood at the heart of a natural chamber, surrounded by tallow candles and rotting silks. She was perfect. More perfect than any living thing should be. Her eyes shimmered with violet fire, her lips curved with impossible allure. Behind her, dozens of faces. Not people. Faces, stitched into the walls, mouths open in eternal pleasure and horror. Their skin fused to the stone. Their eyes blinked. Elias raised his sword. "Daemon?" She laughed. It was music and madness, bells and blades. "You flatter me, hunter." Her voice rippled through the chamber, echoing through bone. "But not quite. I am only what they made me." The form shimmered. Her legs twisted into reverse-jointed limbs. Her back split, revealing pulsating muscle and barbed tendrils. Her skin peeled in ribbons of silk, exposing glistening flesh beneath. Her face was the last to go, replaced with a leering mask of bone and teeth that stretched too wide. One arm split into 3, her mouth opened sideways. And then she screamed. The force of it cracked stone. Elias flew backward, slamming into the wall. Blood poured from his ears. She moved like lust given form, too fast to follow, too fluid to predict. One tendril lashed out, slicing a gash across his thigh. Another snapped toward his throat. He ducked, swung low, his blade carving a bloody arc. It grazed her leg. She moaned. Pain fueled her. "You can't win," she purred, circling him. "You fight with fear. I feed on it." Elias said nothing. He knelt, pressing a hand to the wound on his leg, whispering a prayer through clenched teeth. His pendant glowed, faintly at first, then brighter. No. Why didn't it glow white? Apparently excess power from the brood snake. Elias, "Your god is not here," the demonette hissed. "Only pleasure." Elias reached into his coat, pulled out a glass vial. "Holy water, blessed by the Grand Theogonist himself." He shattered it against the ground. The explosion was not sound, but absence, a void that devoured the moans, the whispers, the seduction. The chamber screamed as the blessing scoured it clean. Lilith staggered, her form flickering, her beauty cracked, peeled away like old paint. Beneath it, bone, sinew, worms of purple muscle. Elias struck. His flamberge carved through her side, tearing flesh and ichor. She shrieked, slashed back, raking his chest with claws like obsidian. Blood sprayed. He didn't stop. Again, until she collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs and writhing tongues. She looked up at him. Her final face, that of a frightened girl. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." The hammer of Sigmar crushed her skull. Silence. The moans faded. The eyes in the walls closed. Elias dropped to one knee, panting, soaked in blood, not entirely his own. He lit a purification flame and set the chamber alight. The walls screamed one final time. By dawn, the Traken estate was a smoldering ruin. The nobility called it an unfortunate fire. Elias called it a warning. Beneath the perfume and silks of Alddorf, chaos grinned, and now he knew its face. Chapter 5. The Sigil of Damnation. The village of Bruckendorf was already dead when Elias arrived. Ash clung to the timbers of homes, and the air was thick with the stench of scorched flesh and alchemical rot. Crows fought over scraps of meat too large to be animal, and blood traced runes in the dirt where children once played. The villagers had been sacrificed, bodies dismembered and reassembled into blasphemous patterns, each corpse a letter in a language never meant for mortal mouths. Chaos had been here. And not just cultists, something greater. Elias moved through the ruins like a phantom, his boots crunching over bones. Behind him marched a small cadre of Templars from the Order of the Silver Flame, armored and silent, their faces veiled beneath masks of silvered steel. They reached the chapel in the center of the square, a grotesque mockery of Sigmar's house, now repurposed into a temple of madness. Its doors had been replaced with flayed skin. Elias gestured. "Cleanse it." The Templars advanced, blades drawn. They didn't reach the threshold. The chapel breathed. Its walls pulsed. A cry erupted from within, not a voice, but a sound like metal twisting under divine strain. The ground split open beneath the feet of the Templars, and from the fissure surged a wave of living corruption. Tentacles of flesh and bone, mouths gnashing along their lengths, snapped like whips through the air. One Templar screamed as a tendril pierced his chest and dragged him screaming into the pit. Another was flung into the chapel, where the doorway devoured him like a maw. Elias didn't hesitate. He charged the heart of the chaos spawn, flamberge glowing with sanctified oil. The creature was unlike any demonette or beastman he had ever faced. It had no true form, only shifting limbs and organs, constantly growing, constantly hungering. A chaos horror, born of excess and mutation. He hacked through one limb. Acidic blood sprayed his arm, searing through leather and into his flesh. He cried out, the pain blinding, but swung again. His blade sang through bone, severed an eye that blinked on a knee, pierced a belly that screamed with 50 voices. The creature lashed out. One barbed limb wrapped around his waist, another around his throat. He was lifted into the air, vision fading, breath gone. It's both. Not with words, but with thought. It was inside him. Deal with it. You are not theirs. You are ours. Visions exploded behind his eyes. Cities burning, fields of skulls. A tower of flesh and gold reaching into a violet sky. A name, vast and infinite, etched into the stars. His body convulsed. Blood poured from his nose. Then, light, a flash of purest white. The creature shrieked and recoiled. Elias fell. He hit the ground hard, the wind driven from his lungs. The surviving Templars were gone, eaten, torn apart, or fled. Only Elias remained. And he should have died, but he didn't. Instead, he woke hours later, alone, his blade lying beside him, still glowing faintly with residual sanctity. He rolled onto his back and saw the mark. It was carved into his left side, just beneath the ribcage, etched into his flesh like a brand. A swirling, asymmetrical symbol that pulsed faintly. It hurt to look at. The Sigil of Chaos. Not the open star of the ruinous powers. No, this was older, subtler. A personal mark, the kind demons gave to those they chose. Chosen. The word made bile rise in his throat. He scrubbed at it with sand, cursed, clawed at the flesh until blood ran in rivulets. Still it remained. He bound his side tightly, wrapped in bandages soaked with purity oil. It blistered, burned, but the sigil refused to fade. He returned to the fortress of the Silver Flame 2 days later, wounded, silent. Father Aldrich demanded answers. Elias said only that the chapel was cleansed, that the others had fallen. He gave no mention of the mark. He trained harder, prayed longer, bathed in sanctified water until his skin peeled. The mark never left. At night it whispered, not in words but feelings, desire, power, doubt. And Elias began to see, not visions, but truths. A brother who beat confessions from children in the dark. A priest who pocketed bribes while condemning others for heresy. The order spoke of purity, but there was rot in their hearts. He stood alone in the Hall of Judgment one night, staring into the great fire where heretics were cremated. "Burn me," he whispered, "if I must." But no flames came, only silence, and so he kept the secret. Elias Krieg, witch hunter of the Silver Flame, scourge of chaos, marked and changing. Chapter 6. The Road to Midden. The road to Midden was carved through a forest that had never stopped bleeding. Old war wounds lay half hidden beneath moss and ash, broken blades jutting from tree trunks, rusted helmets nesting mushrooms, bones tangled in roots like forgotten sins. The people whispered that the forest remembered, that the land held grudge and grief like a dog with a buried bone. Elias Krieg didn't believe in superstition, but he did believe in death. He rode at the front of the caravan, his black cloak fluttering, the twin-tailed comet of Sigmar tarnished but visible on his chest. His horse, an old war beast named Marrow, snorted at every rustle in the trees. The forest pressed close, branches like claws, leaves whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. They were 20 in all. 4 mercenaries from the Iron Vultures, steel-eyed killers in mismatched armor, their axes caked with blood from a dozen skirmishes. One had sharpened his teeth into fangs and slept with rats. 7 pilgrims seeking redemption through suffering, their feet bloodied from the long march, eyes glazed with zealotry. They dragged wooden icons and muttered prayers like curses. One woman whipped herself hourly, smiling through the pain. 2 oxen carts carried supplies, salted meat, holy relics, and 1 sealed crate wrapped in chains, marked with a sunburst in crimson wax. Elias hadn't yet decided whether to open it. And then there was the elf. He rode a pale white steed that looked more sculpture than animal, draped in silks and silver bells. His name was Valeth Moondrake, and everything about him felt wrong. Too calm, too clean. His robes were untouched by dust. His eyes, icy, ageless, watched Elias with amusement. "I thought your kind preferred travel under moonlight," Elias said on the second day. "I make exceptions for the company of zealots," Velith replied, smiling faintly. "Your fire is entertaining." Elias nearly ran him through. By the third day they found the corpse, hung from a branch by sinew, stripped naked, flayed in strips that fluttered in the breeze like prayer flags. The man's face had been removed, cut clean, lips peeled back in a permanent silent scream. His chest was carved with words in dark tongue. Elias read enough to understand. The song has begun. He cut the body down without a word and burned it on a pyre of blackthorn. The pilgrims wailed. The mercenaries sharpened their weapons. That night the screams began. The first came from the second wagon. A mercenary had vanished. All that remained was his armor, empty, still warm, slick with blood on the inside. Then the rats came. Hundreds of them. Not normal ones, twisted things with human fingers, some with empty eye sockets filled with wriggling worms. They swarmed the camp, gnawed through saddlebags, chewed the nails from a sleeping pilgrim's hands. Elias swung his blade in arcs of firelight, crushing vermin with every strike. Velith stood still, chanting softly in a tongue like flowing ice. With a flash of his hand, a ring of ethereal knives spun through the rats, slicing them into steaming chunks. Morning brought no peace. They marched in silence. The forest seemed to tighten around them. Trees leaned inward, roots squirming like worms. On the fifth day they found the hut, a lone structure in a clearing made of twisted antlers and dried skin. Symbols daubed in shit and blood marked the walls. Inside, 3 children sat in a circle, humming a song in perfect unison. Their eyes had been removed, tongues cut to stumps. Elias stepped in. The children stopped humming. He smiled. He raised his pistol. Velith touched his arm. "They are not the source. Emily fed from it," Elias growled. "And that's enough." 3 shots. 3 shattered skulls. Blood soaked the floor. The pilgrims howled in protest. One lunged at Elias, screaming about innocence, about Sigmar's mercy. Elias turned and broke his jaw with the butt of his gun. "There is no mercy," he said, "when chaos has touched the soul." That night they camped near a ravine. Elias sat apart from the others, sharpening his blade. Velith approached, bottle of elven wine in hand. "You burn too bright, witch hunter," the elf said, sipping. "You will destroy yourself." Elias didn't look up. "Then I'll burn the world with me if it's already lost." Velith chuckled. "How poetic. Chaos would love you." Elias turned, eyes sharp. "Watch your tongue, elf. The forest isn't the only thing that remembers." In the distance, a howl echoed through the trees. Not animal. Not man. Something else. Something waiting. Elias stood, sword in hand. Midden land lay ahead, and it was no longer sleeping. Chapter 7. The Beast of Grunwald Hollow. The trees of Grunwald Hollow moaned when the wind passed through them, like the dying gasps of a battlefield that never forgot. The caravan moved slowly now, wheels caked with thick mire, oxen twitching nervously with every step, eyes wide and rolling. The forest had grown darker with each mile, not merely shaded, but dimmer somehow, as though light itself had thinned. The sun became a pale disk, barely visible beyond a canopy of branches, twisted like the hands of the damned. Elias Krieg rode at the rear. He had insisted on it. You always watch the rear when something is hunting you. And something was. They felt it first, a presence, unseen but suffocating. The animals smelled it, trembled at it. The mercenaries started snapping at shadows. The pilgrims clutched their relics tighter, knuckles white with silent prayers. On the second day in the hollow, the first scream came. It was short, sharp, and far too human. They found the corpse an hour later. One of the mercenaries, Aaron, the one with sharpened teeth. He was hanging from a tree, 20 feet above the trail, arms outstretched like wings. His rib cage had been torn open from below, organs missing. His face was turned backwards, mouth still open in an expression of disbelief. No tracks, no sign of struggle, just that grin. Elias ordered a burning. Velith watched the flames with narrowed eyes. This forest is touched. Something old stirs beneath its roots. Elias said nothing. He already knew. The night was still, too still. No crickets, no birds, no distant hoot of owls. Just the flicker of the campfire and the pounding of Elias' heart. He didn't sleep. He watched. And at the blackest hour, it came. A shape emerged from the trees, not running, but crawling low to the ground, impossibly fast, like a spider made of meat and nightmare. It had too many limbs, each one ending in barbed talons that tore through the dirt like knives. Its skin was patchwork, fur, scale, bone, and weeping flesh all sewn together by unseen hands. It sniffed the air, a snort, wet and heavy. Then it raised its head, long, angular, horned, and Elias saw its face. It was a face he knew, his own, twisted, burned. The left side marked with the same sigil still hidden beneath his robes, and when it opened its mouth, his voice came from it. Elias sensed. He drew his flamberge, bile rising in his throat. The beast charged. It moved like hunger incarnate, limbs flailing, maw wide. Elias met it head-on, blade flashing in the firelight. The first strike sliced off one claw, but the limb kept moving, fingers twitching on their own. It reared up, shrieking in 3 overlapping voices, his own, his mother's, and the demonette's from Alddorf. It knew. Steel met flesh, bone split. Blood, thick and black and steaming, splattered across the earth. Elias ducked under a swing that shattered a cartwheel, rolled between its limbs, and drove his blade deep into the beast's underbelly. The thing screeched, trying to pull away, but he held on, tearing his blade free in a spray of gore. The creature slammed him into a tree, his ribs cracked. His vision blurred. "Join us," it hissed. He spat blood into its eye. "Burn." He hurled a purification grenade, a sealed vial of sanctified oil and alchemical fire. It shattered against the beast's shoulder. The scream it let out shook the trees. Its flesh ignited, holy fire crawling across its malformed body. It thrashed, shrieking, clawing at its own skin, gouging chunks from its face. "Releases," it wailed again. "You bear the mark. We are the same." "Oh," Elias whispered, voice ragged. "I choose." With a final charge, he leapt forward, sword high, and brought the flamberge down in a brutal arc. The blade sheared through the monster's neck. Its head hit the ground with a sickening thud. The body collapsed moments later, convulsing in silence. The fire consumed it. By dawn, the smell of burning rot still clung to the trees. The caravan moved on, silent, shaken, fewer than before. Elias rode at the front now, and every time the wind shifted, he swore he could still hear it, whispering his name. Chapter 8. The Witch's Eyes. The village of Starnfeld lay crooked beneath a gray, pissing sky. Smoke rose from thatched roofs in thin, choking strands, and the streets were lined with mud, manure, and the stench of terrified humanity. People did not speak when Elias Krieg rode into town. They watched, huddled behind shutters or behind bundles of kindling disguised as arms. Witch hunters had a reputation. The village elder greeted him with forced reverence, bowing so deeply Elias feared his spine might snap. "Your Holiness, We did as instructed. She's locked in the grain cellar. Haven't fed her in a day. Good, Elias muttered, swinging down from his saddle. Show me. They passed a church, desecrated by moss, its twin-tailed comet worn to a scar across stone. Children with sallow faces stared through boarded windows. The crops had rotted in the field. Something hung in the air here, like the breath before a scream. The cellar door groaned open. The smell hit first. Sweat, fear, and the faint metallic sting of blood. Inside, the girl huddled in the dark, wrapped in rags, wrists bound with rusted iron shackles. Her hair was matted with filth. One eye was swollen shut. The other was wide, impossibly wide. She looked at him. Not at his face. Through it. She's mute, the elder said. But she drew things in the dirt. Visions. We burned them, of course. Elias stepped forward. Who accused her? Her father, after she said he'd die in his sleep. He was found the next morning, face twisted like something had screamed into it. The girl didn't flinch when Elias crouched. Her uninjured eye blinked once. Then, slowly, she raised a shaking finger toward him. Do you know what I am? He asked softly. She nodded. Do you fear me? She shook her head. Then she opened her mouth and spoke in a voice that wasn't her own. The flame will betray you, Elias Krieg. The mark will bleed open, and you will stand before a god with no name. And you will kneel. Elias reeled back as if struck. The chains clinked quietly. The girl slumped, her eye rolling into her head. She's possessed, the elder hissed. You heard it. The daemon speaks through her. She's not possessed, Elias growled. She's gifted. You'll let her live? Elias turned, flamberge half drawn. Do you challenge my authority, peasant? The elder turned pale. No, my lord, of course not. Outside, the villagers had gathered with pitchforks, knives, makeshift torches. Fear turned their eyes wild. Give her to the fire, a woman shrieked. She cursed my crops. He made my baby blind. She speaks in sleep. She is a demon. Elias emerged with the girl in his arms. I will deal with her as the order commands. Cerro Pascual, she must burn. Elias let the girl down gently, drew his blade. I said, he growled, stand down. Someone threw a rock. It hit him in the shoulder. Another flew. Then another. He charged. The flambears sang through the air, carving a path through flesh and ignorance. The first man to charge lost both arms at the elbow. Blood sprayed like rain. A woman tried to stab him with a meat skewer. He drove it back into her throat. Chaos erupted. He moved like the flame he served, fast, indiscriminate, deadly. His blade painted the mud crimson. Screams echoed through the village. Limbs scattered. Blood flowed into puddles. When it was done, 13 lay dead. The rest ran, shrieking, into the forest, children in tow. Elias sheathed his blade. The girl looked up at him. She did not cry. He burned the village that night, salted the earth, took nothing. The girl's name was Annika. She rode with him now, silent, watching. Nay, he said. And in the flames behind them, the shadows danced. Chapter 9. The Trial at Hollenheim. The gates of Hollenheim groaned open like the jaws of a dying beast. Elias Krieg rode into the village beneath a sky the color of old bones. Annika silent behind him. Rot clung to the air like a second skin, bitter, sweet, and wet. The stench of death mixed with the sour tang of rotted grain, and the low buzz of flies was constant. Fields lay fallow and blackened. Crows feasted on livestock too emaciated to flee. The villagers stood like scarecrows, blank-eyed and hollow-cheeked, watching Elias as if he were a ghost. A man in rusted mail greeted him near the square. His face was lined like tree bark, and one eye was milky with cataract. "I am Marcus Voll, the Reeve," he said, voice like dry leaves. "Thank Sigmar you came." "I'll decide who deserves thanks," Elias replied, dismounting. He listened to the accusations as they poured like vomit from frightened mouths. A baker whose oven belched black smoke. A widow whose crops never grew. A mute boy who drew sigils in the dirt with his toes. A heretic, a witch, a mutant, they named them all. And at the center of it all stood Mayor Helmrich, a proud, portly man with teeth too white and eyes too calm. His robes were rich for a dying village, deep red velvet with gold trim, hands soft and clean, not the cracked and bleeding claws of a man who claimed to suffer with his people. Elias felt it immediately, a wrongness, a hume beneath the skin. He said nothing. 3 must be judged, Mayor Richter said, motioning to the accused. "The people demand it. Burn them, and this plague shall lift." Elias approached the first, a hunched old woman who whispered to invisible things. Her teeth were gone. Her eyes were blind. "Who do you speak to?" Elias asked. "Voices," she rasped. "My sons, drowned at sea. They warn me. They cry." The second was the boy, maybe 7. He didn't speak, just stared. His drawings were crude spirals and lines, unintelligible. The third was the widow. Her hands were calloused, her skin sun-blasted. "I pray to Sigmar every day," she hissed, "and when he didn't answer, I prayed to anything that would." That was enough to damn her. The pyres were built. The villagers gathered, trembling with anticipation. They needed blood. They needed blame. Elias stood before the flames, flambeige across his back. He looked at the widow. "Do you confess to heresy?" "I do," she whispered, eyes hard. "Because your God is deaf." Elias nodded. "Then let judgment be done." He stepped forward, then paused. Something moved at the edge of his vision. A shimmer, a ripple. He turned and saw it. Mayor Richter's face twitched, not a spasm of nerves, but a slip of mask. His skin shifted for half a second, revealing something beneath, black and glistening, with eyes like boiling tar. Elias turned slowly. "No fire today?" The crowd gasped. The mayor stepped forward, smiling. "You forget your place, witch hunter. These people demand judgment." Elias drew his sword. "They'll get it." The flambeige ignited. The mayor screamed, not in protest but in revelation. Flesh tore. Bones cracked. His robes exploded outward as his body convulsed, doubling in size. Skin fell like old parchment, revealing the horror beneath. A demon stood in Richter's place, 8 feet tall, horns curling like thorned vines, chest split by a gaping vertical mouth that oozed black ichor. Its fingers were bone scythes, its feet cloven hooves. The villagers wailed. The beast roared. Elias charged. The flambeire met demon flesh, sparks flying. The creature retaliated with a backhand that flung Elias into a wall, bones crunching on impact. He rose, coughing blood, lips twisted in a grin. Finally, a trial worth holding. The fight was a storm. Stone shattered beneath talons, villagers scattered, trampled. Elias drove his blade into the demon's thigh. It shrieked. 1,000 voices layered into one and vomited a torrent of maggots from its chest mouth. Elias rolled, slicing upward, severing a limb. The creature screamed and lunged. He met it head on. plunging a sanctified dagger into its heart-mouth. Holy light erupted from the wound. The beast convulsed, shrieked, burned. Its final words hissed into Elias' skull. "You are already ours." And then it burst. Gore sprayed the square. Black blood hissed on stone. The villagers fell silent, soaked and shaking. Elias stood in the ruins, coated in filth. He pointed to the accused, dead against the wall at the library. No one argued. That night, Elias watched the flames alone. And Annika whispered, "It knew your name." He didn't reply. But he didn't sleep either. Chapter 10. The Cursed Tome. They called themselves the Veilborn. Their lair was deep within the jagged hills, buried in the bones of an ancient fortress that had once served the old Sigmarite order, now blackened by fire and overgrowth, strangled by vines the color of dried blood. The cult had hollowed it out like a corpse, festering in its decayed sanctity. Elias Krieg had tracked them for weeks, through slaughtered villages and inverted sigils carved into the skulls of priests. They left trails of viscera and desecration, but it was the book he hunted. The one their high priest was said to guard. The Liber Tenebris. A tome bound in demon hide, said to hold spells not spoken since the fall of the Silver Spire, not written but grown, inked in souls. Its knowledge corrupts, its pages whisper. And Elias wanted it. Not to read, not to wield, to hide, to lock it in silver chains and bury it beneath holy oil and stone. He found them during their rite, 30 of them, naked beneath a canopy of living flame, surrounding a pit that screamed with mouths not its own. Their high priest stood tall and skeletal, crowned with a circlet of writhing worms. In his hands, the Liber Tenebris opened to a page that bled. Elias didn't wait. He hurled a sanctified firebomb into their midst. The explosion ruptured the riot. Flame washed over bare flesh, lighting oil-soaked bodies into torches. Screams erupted. Panic fractured the circle. Elias leapt down, flambeau cleaving through the neck of a fleeing cultist. Blood fanned out. Another charged. He pivoted, impaled him through the gut, and kicked him into the screaming pit. The high priest turned. "Thief," he hissed. His voice was 10 voices, all in mockery. "You cannot steal what belongs to the Veil." Elias lunged. Steel met sorcery. The priest conjured shadow to parry, black tendrils blocking each strike, but Elias was faster. He drove the blade through the priest's ribs, then twisted, shattering bone, tearing flesh. The priest convulsed, his mouth opened too wide. Blood poured out like ink. The book dropped and landed in Elias' hands. It pulsed, warm, wet, alive. The heartbeat echoed in his ears as he looked down at the cover, blackened flesh, tattooed with moving glyphs. Eyes opened along the spine. They blinked at him. "Take me," they whispered. "Read me." He wrapped it in iron chain, sealed it in oilskin. But it was too late. That night, he made camp far from the ruins. Annika was silent, watching the stars with an expression he didn't trust. He buried the book beneath their tent, prayed over it, surrounded it with sigils drawn in ash and wine. But when sleep came, so did the dreams. They began softly, whispers in dark halls, footsteps behind closed doors, shadows on the edge of flame. Then, pages turning, he saw symbols he could not name, languages that carved themselves into his skull like brands. He stood in places that defied reason, library vaults of screaming books, staircases made of ribs, halls of glass reflecting his worst moments. The book spoke. It called him chosen. It showed him secrets, how to bind diamond essence to steel, how to make heresy kneel with a name alone. It promised power, and in the dream he listened. When he awoke, his hand was bleeding. Carved into his palm, with no memory of how, were the first 3 glyphs from the tome's 2nd chapter. Elias stared at them, and for the first time since his training at the Fortress of the Silver Flame, he felt true fear. He did not tell Annika. He did not tell the Order. Instead, he bound the book tighter, sealed it in a coffin of silver nails, and buried it beneath 3 feet of earth. But that night, it still whispered, and in his dreams the pages kept turning. Chapter 11. The Black Lantern. Smoke stained the morning sky above the hamlet of Ulsfeld. Not the smoke of cooking fires or blacksmiths' forges, but the acrid, bitter stench of burning flesh. Elias Krieg approached the village square on foot. Marrow left tethered outside the tree line. Annika walked behind him, silent as ever, her eyes scanning the scene ahead. They emerged from the woods to find a crowd of gaunt villagers gathered in stunned, motionless silence around a pyre still hissing with heat. The fire had mostly burned low, but blackened bones jutted from the coals like the twisted branches of a tree in winter. The smell was suffocating. At the center of the crowd stood a man in dark leather, oil-back armor studded with runes. Elias didn't recognize, some of them too sharp, others too soft, like the symbols etched into nightmares. His hat was wide-brimmed and worn low, shadowing a face half hidden beneath a steel mask. Only one eye showed, pale and predatory. In his gloved left hand he held a lantern, black iron, etched with thorn chains. Its flame was not gold, but blue, cold, flickering, alive. The Black Lantern. Elias had heard rumors of it, spoken in hushed tones among the Order. A relic stolen from the vaults of Nuln, a beacon that burned heresy from the soul, and perhaps too much else. The man turned. "Elias Krieg," he said. "I wondered how long it would take you to follow the scent." Elias did not answer. He recognized the voice. Gravel and gravel again, hardened over fire and steel. "Matthias Draeger," Elias said at last. "You were declared excommunicate." Draeger shrugged. "They burn my writ, not my purpose." Elias glanced at the pyre. "Who?" "A seer," Draeger said. "Claimed she saw visions of plague. Said the gods whispered in her dreams. People listened. I silenced her." "Was she marked?" Draeger smiled under the mask. "Does it matter?" The words hung between them like a noose. "You killed her on suspicion alone?" "I killed her because doubt festers," Draeger said, stepping closer. "Because when one voice speaks heresy, 10 more listen. The tide rises. You know this, Elias. You've seen it." He pointed to Annika with his lantern. The blue flame flared. The girl flinched. "You carry a child touched by sight. And worse, something speaks in your dreams. I can see the mark in your soul." Elias reached for his flamberge. "Don't mistake tolerance for inaction." Draeger laughed. A low, dead sound. "I don't come to fight. Not yet." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "The Order is rotting. Half of them consort with nobles who buy absolution with coin and flesh. The other half are blind. We see. You and I. We walk the edge of the blade." He held out the lantern. "Join me. Cleanse the world as it must be cleansed. No sermons, no oversight, only fire." Elias stared at the flame. It pulsed with something more than heat. It hungered. And deep in his chest, the mark beneath his ribs burned like coal in a forge. He remembered the tome, the whispers, the dreams. "You use darkness to fight darkness," Leo said. That path ends in shadow." Draeger tilted his head. "Then why do your eyes shine when you look at the flame?" The moment teetered. The villagers watched, holding their breath. Elias stepped back. "I don't kill men without cause," he said. "But if I see you again, that changes." Draeger didn't flinch. "Then we are enemies." "Not yet. But don't mistake the distance between us for mercy." Draeger turned and walked into the woods. The lantern's blue fire lit the path behind him, and the air grew colder in his wake. Elias turned to the villagers. "Your judgment is over. Go home." They dispersed silently, dragging carts and children back to shattered homes. Annika looked up at him. "He scares me," she whispered. "Lies," he shrugged. "Should," Elias replied, "because he used to be me, and he feared what he might still become." Chapter 12. In the Clutches of Slaanesh. It began with music. Faint, lilting, flute and harp, threaded with soft moans that may have been human, or something far worse. The melody seeped through the trees like perfume, drawing Elias Krieg off the blood-soaked trail and toward something ancient, something wrong. By the time he realized what it was too late. The ambush came from silk and shadow. Veiled figures drifted from the woods, draped in gossamer robes that clung to pale, lithe forms. Their movements were like dancers mid-performance, elegant, fluid, obscene. Elias struck the first one down, flamberge cleaving through bone and breast with a shriek of tearing silk. But he was outnumbered. The air thickened. The scent of sweet rot cloyed in his throat, dulled his limbs. Fingers found his wrists, his throat, his thoughts. Whispers slithered into his ears, voices from his dreams, from the book, from Annika's soft warnings. He raised his blade again. Then came the pain. A kiss of a poisoned blade across the back of his thigh. A kiss on his lips from someone with too many eyes. Another on his chest, right over the sigil he still hid from the order. It burned, violently, as if responding to their touch. He collapsed, and the world dissolved into velvet darkness. Elias awoke on a dais of writhing flesh. The walls were draped in skins, still twitching, embroidered with pearls and teeth. Light shimmered from candles held in severed hands. The cult was all around him, dozens of them, men, women, neither, both, beautiful, terrible, perfectly wrong. And at their center, seated upon a throne of rib cages and pleasure-addled wretches, was her, the priestess. Her face was covered by a porcelain mask, cracked across the lips. Her voice was every lover's whisper and every nightmare's moan. "Welcome, Elias Krieg," she purred. "We've waited for you." He tried to move. Chains of silk held him, impossibly strong. "You burn with contradiction," she cooed. "So devout, so furious, and yet marked." She trailed a single claw down his chest, and his mark screamed. "You carry a gift, and still you cling to flame and pain and denial. Why?" He spat in her face. "Because you're filth." "In silk." She laughed. It echoed in the flesh walls. Something wept behind her throne. She leaned closer. "We could show you joy beyond comprehension. You wear pain like armor, but you've never felt." The cult surged forward, dancing, moaning, chanting in tongues that made the air throb. They undressed him, clothed him in nothing but chains and kisses, sliced symbols into his flesh with silver blades, painted him with alchemical oils that stung and soothed all at once. And through it all, Elias watched. He watched their rhythm, their pattern. He listened, not to their words, but to their vanity. He remembered the passages from the Liber Tenebris, forbidden, vile, but useful, and he whispered back. He chanted words he shouldn't know, weaving false prayers into Slaanesh mantras. The flames in the chamber responded, twisting, flickering. The priestess turned. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Elias grinned, teeth stained red. "Using your own ecstasy against you." The flame exploded. The chamber screamed. Elias shattered his bonds with raw will and blessed steel. He leapt from the dais, seized a blade from a shrieking acolyte, and began the slaughter. He fought like a man possessed, cutting through beauty warped into madness. They came at him with smiles, arms open. He answered with steel and fire. He drove his blade through the throat of a man with 6 tongues. He crushed the skull of a sobbing child woman with a censer. He set fire to the silken altar and cast the priestess into it. She screamed, and in her death wail she called him brother. He emerged from the ruin hours later, naked, bloodied, burned. Annika found him in the ashes. She wrapped him in his cloak. He didn't speak for 2 days. When he finally did, he said only this. "I felt it. For a moment I wanted to stay." Then he carved a fresh scar across the mark on his side. To remember. And to hate. Chapter 13. The Whispering Tower. The Whispering Tower stood like a wound in the world. Its spire tore through the northern forest canopy, crooked and black, shaped not by masonry but by something older. There were no bricks, only obsidian glass, slick with condensation despite the dead chill in the air. The structure leaned ever so slightly, as if it listened to things beneath the earth. Elias Krieg stood before it, heart hammering. Annika remained behind, her hands clutched tightly to her chest, whispering prayers to a god who hadn't answered her since the plains of Hollenheim. The Liber Tenebris had drawn them here. Each night, it whispered clearer, its voice taking on a tone both maternal and monstrous. It had shown him images, flashes of a pale woman with hair like raven feathers, her fingers traced in light, speaking words that bent the sky. His mother. The book had never lied. Twisted, yes, manipulative, always, but it never lied. The tower's mouth was a jagged crack in the stone, not a door, not an entrance, an invitation. Elias stepped through, flamber drawn, pistol cocked. Inside it was alive. Veins of silver bugle light pulsed through the walls. Dust didn't settle here. It hovered, drifting through the air like ash suspended in a still furnace. The floor was warm. The air was thick with voices, not sounds, but intent. They scraped the inside of his skull like fingernails. He climbed. Each floor was different. On the first, mirrors lined the walls, each one showing a different version of himself. A child, bloodied and weeping. A man in golden robes, haloed and adored. A monster with horns, kneeling before a throne of skin. He looked away. On the second, he found a room filled with bones, human, elven, beastkin, even demon. Each one had been etched with writing. He knelt, examined one. The script was the same as the grimoires, dead language, dream-born. And they all whispered his name. By the third floor, the light changed, grew warmer, familiar. He felt something, not fear, not exactly, something like longing. The chamber ahead opened into a domed library, untouched by time. Books floated on invisible currents. Quills wrote in the air. Candles burned with violet flames. And there, in the center, stood her. Not a ghost, not an echo, feeling a presence. The woman turned slowly. Her face was his, so clearly it stopped his breath. Her eyes were mismatched, one green, one gold. Her body swathed in robes made of stitched-together prophecies. Her hair fell in midnight waves, shifting in a breeze that didn't exist. She smiled. "You came, my son." Elias raised his sword. "You're not her." "Oh, I am," she said, stepping forward. "Or what's left of her." She poured herself into this place, into the book, to protect you. He stepped back. "My mother was a tavern girl, a servant." "She was those things," the voice admitted, "but also more. She fled the cult of the serpent moon, took you from the altar meant to anoint you. She paid for that with her soul, and left this behind." She gestured. The tower trembled. Visions flooded his head. A woman fleeing through fire, holding a babe, him, chanting priests behind her, screaming, a dagger slicing flesh. Her death. End of feeling in the curse. One to shield her son. The mark on Elias' ribs burned, bright now, white-hot. "She marked you," the president said. "Not to damn you, but to shield you. The sigil hides you from the gaze of the ruinous powers, but it hungers. If you fall, it will consume you." Elias trembled. "You're lying." She stepped closer. "No, Elias. I am giving you the truth your order never would. They feared her. Feared you. You could end the bloodline of the Serpent Moon, or revive it. That is your burden." He raised the grimoire. "You speak through this?" "Yes," she said, placing her palm on the tome. "But you could do more than listen. You could wield it, control the power, be the flame and the fuel." He pressed the muzzle of his pistol to her forehead. "Then I choose to burn." He pulled the trigger. The chamber cracked with the shot, but she was gone. Only silence remained. The tome quivered in his hands. Elias turned and descended the tower. He didn't speak to Annika, not then. But that night, in his sleep, the Grimrock opened itself. And this time, it didn't whisper. It screamed. Chapter 14. The Price of Truth. The gates of the fortress of the Silver Flame groaned open under Elias Krieg's blood-stained fists. The rain poured in torrents, turning the courtyard into black mud, washing the stench of road and old death from his cloak, but no water could rinse the fire from his eyes or the mark from his side, now throbbing with each heartbeat like a wound screaming secrets. He walked alone through the hallowed stone corridors where he had once knelt, bled, and prayed. Priests and acolytes parted like waves before him, none brave or foolish enough to challenge the man they had forged into a living weapon. He passed the Hall of Penitence, where he'd once etched purity verses into his skin with a bone needle, past the Chapel of Judgment, where the screams still echoed in the stones. Finally he reached the sanctum. The door of dark oak swung inward with a groan of age. Inside, Father Aldrich stood before the great brazier of eternal flame, its golden light casting dancing shadows across his ancient face. He didn't turn. "You return in silence, Elias," Aldrich said, "like a son who knows the weight of his failure." "I return," Elias growled, "because you owe me the truth." Aldrich's shoulders tensed. Slowly he faced him. His eyes were sunken, colder than the grave, framed by a face carved from granite. "You've seen the tower." Elias stepped forward, slamming the Liber Tenebris onto the altar beside the flame. It squirmed slightly beneath the iron bindings. "I saw her," Elias said, voice cracking like old wood. "And I saw you in that memory. You were there when she died." Haldra's silence was confirmation. "Why?" Elias demanded. "Why take me in? Why train me, bless me, only to hide what I am?" Aldrich moved with glacial calm, retrieving a flask of sanctified wine from a locked drawer. He poured 2 cups. "You were born cursed," he said, placing one cup untouched before Elias. "Your mother was a sorceress of the serpent moon. You were marked before your first breath. Do you know how many wanted you burned in the cradle?" "I was a child," Elias hissed. "You were a weapon," Aldrich snapped, voice rising. "A sword forged in heresy, honed in faith. We needed something sharp enough to pierce the veil between holy and damned." Elias's jaw clenched. "So you made me your monster?" "No," Aldrich said, his voice softening into something that might have been regret. "We made you our shield, and when the time came, our blade. Your life spared thousands. Would you rather have perished with your mother, crying in her arms as the demons feasted?" Elias turned, fists trembling. "You used me." Aldrich approached, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You're stronger than any witch hunter we've bred. You've resisted temptations that would have broken half the order. Even now you stand here, scarred, branded, chosen, but still alive. You were never meant to be clean. You were meant to be necessary." Elias shoved him back. "I was meant to be free." He drew his flamberge. Aldrich did not flinch. "Do you intend to kill me?" Elias stared into the flame. "No," he said. "That would be mercy." He reached for his chest, tore the sigil of the silver flame from his cloak, and cast it into the brazier. The fire hissed, flickered black for a heartbeat. "I renounce the order." Aldrich's lips twitched. "You'll be branded a heretic, a renegade." "Let them come," Elias growled, turning toward the door. "They taught me well." He left without another word, and behind him the eternal flame flickered again, just for a moment, then whispered his name. Chapter 15. Mark of the False Prophet. The city of Echtel was on the brink. Its streets thrummed with voices, not in fear, but rapture. Crude banners flapped in the wind, parchments painted with red suns, broken comets, and bleeding eyes. Statues of Sigmar had been torn down and replaced with effigies of a man robed in white and gold, arms spread, gaze lifted to the heavens. The people called him Tomas the Redeemed. He was tall, clean-faced, draped in radiant cloth that shimmered with a light too pure for the world. His voice could still a riot or stir a massacre. He preached of a new empire, one without chains, without the hypocrisy of nobles, without the corruption of the church. And they listened. Peasants and nobles alike flocked to him, falling to their knees, weeping as he passed. He performed miracles, healing plague-stricken children with a kiss, turning wine to water, making the blind see. His words glowed in the air when he preached. But Elias Krieg knew the truth the moment he saw him. The smile, it didn't reach the eyes. In the eyes they shimmered in violet just behind the irises. Subtle. Clever, but wrong. Elias stood at the edge of the square, flambears hidden beneath his cloak, Annika beside him, stiff and watchful. She trembled. "He's not Tomas," she whispered. "He smells like the screaming book." Elias nodded. He had seen demon possession before, violent, grotesque. This was something else, and subtle, the worst kind. That evening, under the glow of torchlight and chants, Tomas stood atop the altar of the ruined cathedral. He raised his arms, and the crowd went silent. "My children," he said, voice like honey laced with thorns, "the time of judgment is come. The old world burns, the false gods perish, from the ashes we rise." They erupted in cheers. Elias stepped forward. "Tomas of Echtel," he shouted, "by the authority of Sigmar." He felt the irony stab like a dagger. I accuse you of daemon-kind possession. Gasps, shouts. Tomas turned. Slowly, smiling. And who are you to judge me, hunter? Your eyes betray you, Elias said. Your miracles reek of sorcery. You speak not for the Empire, but for them. He drew the flamberge. The crowd recoiled. Tomas held up his hands, mock innocent. You see, he said to the people, this man, once of the order, cast out, marked by chaos himself. The crowd turned. Dozens of eyes fell to Elias' side, where his shirt had shifted, just enough for the edge of the cursed sigil to show. No, Elias roared. That mark was a shield, given by my mother to protect me from chaos. The mob didn't listen. They surged. He swung his sword in warning, slicing the arm from the first man who lunged. Blood sprayed. Screams erupted. They attacked. Elias cut a swath through the faithful, blade flashing in the torchlight. A woman struck him with a pitchfork. He broke her wrist and shoved her back into the mass. He reached the altar. Tomas stood, arms wide. Come then, witch hunter. Let them see what you really are. Elias charged. Their blades clashed, not steel but will. Tomas burned, not with fire, but light that pulsed from his skin. He was changing. Flesh twisted. Runes crawled up his neck. His mouth split at the sides. Wings of light unfurled, but they shimmered with shifting, oily color. Not divine, profane. Tomas shrieked in 1,000 voices. The crowd fell silent, finally seeing. Too late. Elias drove his flamberge through Tomas's chest. The light imploded. The explosion tore the cathedral roof free. Bodies were flung like rag dolls. Elias slammed into a pillar, blood pouring from his ears. When he rose, Tomas was gone. Only ash remained. The mob scattered in horror. Annika pulled him from the ruin, limping, coughing. They'll call you heretic now, she whispered. Let them, Elias said, voice hoarse. Truth never needed their permission. And behind them the city wept. Chapter 16. The Siege of Grunwald. Grunwald's walls bled. Smoke spiraled above the city like a second sky, thick and black and wet with ash. The southern gate had been breached 3 days ago, and still the defenders held. Barely. The screams never stopped. Not at night. Not even in daylight. Elias Krieg stood atop the battlements, eyes rimmed red from blood and sleeplessness. His armor was cracked, torn, and caked in grime and gore. Every breath felt like breathing in soot and burning iron. He held his flamberge in one hand, the other clutching a cracked sigmarite pendant around his neck, more habit now than faith. Beyond the walls, the war grove of the Howling Eye had come. Beastmen by the hundreds, horned horrors, half wolf, half man, reeking of rot and animal filth. Behind them, the cult of the Crimson Grail chanted in tongues that turned the soil black. Each dawn the enemy surged forward in waves of horns and teeth and rusted steel, and each night Grunwald repelled them with fewer men and more corpses. Elias had not planned to lead, but leadership had been thrust upon him when the previous captain of the guard was found hanging by his own entrails over the central courtyard, a sigil of corn carved into his chest with a child's rib. Now Elias stood as commander, the witch hunter, the exile, the last blade between the city and utter damnation. Below, refugees screamed in cellars, priests prayed over barrels of powder, children dug trenches with shaking hands. And in the square, Annika drew a circle of bone and salt. Her eyes glowed faintly. Elias hated that he let her, but knew they'd need every edge. "Reinforcements?" asked Sergeant Brandt, half his face stitched with fresh sutures. Elias shook his head. No birds, no riders, no one is coming. Then we die. No. Elias turned, teeth bared. They do. The next assault came at dusk. The horned warlord, 15 feet tall, burst from the tree line, a massive beast, iron piercings through its nipples, skulls chained to its waist, its skin glowing with Khorne's runes. It swung an axe the size of a coffin and cleaved the outer wall in one screaming blow. The beastmen followed, howling, trampling the wounded, devouring the dead as they advanced. Cultists chanted from behind, their mouths sewn shut, bleeding tears. Fire rained from the sky, twisted sorcery that turned stone to flesh, flesh to screaming ash. Elias met them on the breach. He was the first over the rubble, flamberge glowing with sanctified oil. He drove it into the skull of the first beastman, split another across the collarbone, impaled a third so hard it took 3 seconds to pull the blade free. Blood drenched him, black, red, green. He was death, and death did not pause. Behind him, the defenders rallied. Brant led a shield wall. Annika, eyes blank with vision, spoke words in a tongue Elias didn't recognize, and the bones around her rose. Skeletons, half-formed, cracked, but loyal. They fought at her side like hounds on a leash. The gate held. The courtyard turned into a slaughterhouse. Beastmen and cultists surged forward, met by powder barrels, steel pikes, and flame. One cultist screamed a name and exploded into white fire. 5 men died instantly. Elias staggered, half-blind, then roared and cut down the next 3 attackers like wheat. He saw the warlord again, charging. Elias ran toward him. Steel clanged. They met with a crash that shook the wall. The warlord's axe shattered Elias's pauldron, split his shoulder open to the bone. Pain flared red, but he didn't fall. He rammed a dagger into the beast's throat. It staggered. He drove his flamberge up through the rib cage, twisted. Blood poured down like a waterfall of tar. The warlord laughed, until Elias lit the grenade and shoved it into the wound. Ugh. Viscera painted the stone. The beast fell, headless. The remaining horde hesitated, just for a moment. But it was enough. The defenders surged, arrows, fire, screaming steel. The cultists panicked. The beastmen scattered. By midnight, the enemy fled into the trees, chased by vengeful cries and bolts of flaming pitch. Elias stood in the ruins of the gate, broken, bleeding, but alive. The people cheered. They cried his name. Krieg. 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 He did not raise his hand. He only looked to the stars and whispered, "One more day, because tomorrow they might not be so lucky." Chapter 17. The Pact Beneath, Morsleep. Arusleb hung bloated and green in the night sky, swollen, pulsing, leaking strands of eerie light that writhed like worms across the clouds. It cast a sickly glow over the black crags, painting the jagged rocks with colors no sane man could name. Below it, in the heart of a forgotten ruin, Elias Krieg knelt in a circle of scorched bone, blood, and ancient symbols carved with trembling hands. Around him, the Libra Tenebris floated, pages open, fluttering without wind, whispering in tongues both dead and unborn. He was alone. Annika lay dying outside the circle, her body mangled by the talons of a chaos spawn that should not have lived, should not have breathed. His last volley of black powder had only slowed it. Her ribs had collapsed, her blood soaking into the corrupted earth. Elias had failed, until the book spoke. You want her to live. You want to win. You want vengeance. And we want a door. He'd resisted it before, always, even when it tempted, even when it screamed. But now? with her breath shallow and bubbling, with every prayer unanswered and every spell broken. He opened the book. The glyphs blazed like molten brass, the circle flared, the ruin shuddered, and the thing inside the Liber Tenebri awoke. It did not step into the circle. It grew into it, as if reality peeled open like wet skin and something crawled through. Its form shifted, winged, eyeless, crowned with bone and flame. Its voice had no sound, only weight. Name your desire. Elias did not flinch. Strength, power, enough to kill what's coming, enough to survive it. And the price. He did not hesitate. Take from me what you must. Just leave my will. Spirit laughed. Reality cracked. It plunged into him like 1,000 needles. A wave of memories, images, pain. Entire lifetimes burned into his skull. He saw ancient wars beneath starless skies. Demon princes whispering in cradles. The birth of languages written in screams. And then silence. When Elias awoke, the ground around him was glass. The ruin was gone, vaporized. The book was closed at his feet, bound in new flesh. His right arm had changed. Not visibly, not at a glance, but beneath the skin, veins pulsed like serpent paths. When he clenched his fist, power answered. He staggered to Annika, placed his hand on her chest, and whispered a word he'd never learn. She breathed. Her ribs reformed, blood flowed back into her veins, her eyes opened wide, terror and confusion swirling in their depths. "What did you do?" she whispered. Elias didn't answer, because Morsley pulsed once more, and for the first time in his life he felt it answer him back. Something ancient had taken root in his soul, and he was still Elias Krieg, but now he was something more, and something less. Chapter 18. The Witch Flame Reborn. Alddorf festered beneath a veil of gold. Its towers gleamed in the sunlight, its banners fluttered with Sigmarite pride. But beneath the spires and sermons, rot pulsed like a second heartbeat. The smell of incense and power masked the stench of blood, soaked into the foundations. Elias Krieg returned cloaked in shadow. His armor bore the soot of Grunwald, the burn scars of diamond fire, and the corruption of a pact sealed beneath Morsleb. His blade pulsed faintly at his side, longer, heavier, etched now with runes that shimmered red when no light touched them. And within him something ancient stirred. They didn't recognize him at the gates. The guards saw a traveler cloaked in road dust, weathered and unshaven. One stepped forward, spear raised. "Halt. Declare yourself." Elias looked up. One eye still burned gold, the other glimmered violet. The man dropped his weapon and backed away. Word spread like wildfire. The witch hunter reborn had returned. But not to kneel. Not this time. He moved like a plague through the temple district, every step drawing attention, suspicion, awe. Some bowed, others made signs of warding, none dared speak. His target waited in the Cathedral of the Golden Flame, High Confessor Elias Thorn, a man whose sermons were poetry and whose enemies vanished into darkness. His words shook cities, his hands blessed children, and in secret he feasted on the souls of the innocent. Elias had found the proof in the grimoire's depths, drawn from whispers of the dead, rituals encoded in scripture, blood disguised as ink, names etched in marrow. The doors of the cathedral burst open. The sermon halted. Elias walked the aisle alone, cloak trailing like smoke, his flambears drawn. Thorn stood atop the pulpit, draped in sun gold, his voice already rising. "You dare profane this house of Sigmar?" This house was already profaned. Elias growled. By you. Gasps. Priests clutched relics. Acolytes murmured. Elias raised the book. The Liber Tenebris hovered before him, pages unfurling with a sound like tearing skin. He spoke a single word. The cathedral screamed. The statues of saints cracked and bled. Candles burst into black flame. The stained glass writhed, reshaping into scenes of torture and sacrifice. Thorn snarled, throwing off his robe. And there it was. The truth. His skin shimmered with demon marks, sigils of tzinch, eyes that blinked on his chest, a second mouth on his palm. His voice deepened into a layered chorus. I am the voice of ascendancy, he hissed. The architect's flame. And I am your reckoning. He blinked, as in. They clashed before the altar. Thorn's sorcery twisted the air. Flames of impossible color roared across the marble, turning acolytes to glass statues. Elias dodged, leapt, struck. Steel met flesh. Runes clashed with ritual. Thorn howled and released a wave of force that shattered pews, sent Elias crashing into a pillar. Blood poured from his nose. But he rose. His right arm blazed with violet fire. The pact screamed in his bones. He whispered another word. The book answered. Chains of spectral iron erupted from the air, wrapping around Thorn's limbs, pinning him. He shrieked, thrashing, skin sloughing away to reveal a thing of writhing tendrils and bone beneath. Elias approached, blade dragging behind him. For every child you bled, he said. He drove the flamberge into Thorn's gut. For every orphan's scream. He twisted. For me, he drove it upward, splitting the false priest in half. The demon shrieked and burst into ash. Silence fell. Priests stared in horror. Elias turned to them. You worship that, he spat. You looked away. You let the rot grow. He cast the grimoire at the altar. Burn it, or read it. The choice is yours. But your gods aren't watching anymore. And with that he left the cathedral, bloodied, burning, unbroken. And behind him the witch flame was reborn. Chapter 19. Trial by Flame. The Hall of Judgment Eternal stood at the heart of Alddorf, a monolith of white stone crowned with a dome of burnished gold. Inside nothing stirred except for breath, and even that seemed sacrilegious. Elias Krieg stood at its center, surrounded by a ring of iron-masked inquisitors and robed high priests. They sat on elevated thrones beneath the twin-tailed comet, their silence suffocating. At the pinnacle sat the grand theogonist Hellebrand, face shrouded in a golden veil, body wreathed in incense smoke. His voice, when it came, echoed through the chamber like the grinding of a tomb door. Elias Krieg, once of the Order of the Silver Flame, witch hunter and heretic, do you know why you stand here? Elias was gaunt, bruised and blood-soaked. The mark on his ribs pulsed beneath his tunic, hot with shame and defiance. The Liber Tenebris, chained and bound, rested beside him like a sleeping serpent. I do, he said. Then speak your confession, Hellebrand intoned. Elias stepped forward. I confess, he said, voice steady, to slaying High Confessor Bellius Thorn before the altar of Sigmar, to exposing his corruption, his daemon-bonded soul, and burning it from this world. A ripple ran through the chamber. I confess, Elias continued, to wielding a forbidden tome to do it, to invoking ancient powers beneath Morrisley, to speaking words not found in the Book of Flame, but carved in bones. The theogonist leaned forward slightly. Do you deny corruption? No, Elias said. Only that I was already corrupted the moment you used me as a sword, and lied about who I am, about what I am. He tore open his tunic, revealing the sigil carved into his flesh, still glowing faintly with every heartbeat. Some priests gasped, one recoiled, another wept. This was given to me to protect me, to hide me from the dark gods. He looked up, meeting their eyes. And you would have burned me for it if I had known the truth sooner? The Theogonist stood. His staff, topped with the comet of Sigmar, rang as it struck the floor. You wield forbidden magic. You consort with heresy. You tread the edge of damnation. Elias didn't flinch, and I do it because none of you will. Silence. The verdict came, heavy and final. You are excommunicated, stripped of rank and title. You may not speak the prayers. You may not wield the Sigmarite seal. You are exiled from every holy place of the Empire. Elias nodded once. I accept. The inquisitors parted as he turned to leave. But as he reached the threshold, Hellebrech's voice halted him. Own question, Elias Krieg. Would you do it again? Elias looked back, his face calm. Tomorrow, and again. And again. He stepped out into the rain. The streets were full, peasants, guardsmen, priests, even the broken, the maimed, the poor. Word had spread of a man who killed a high priest, of a hunter who hunted the corrupt, no matter their rank. They parted for him, not in fear, not in reverence, but in recognition. He passed a woman cradling a child with eyes too old, a crippled veteran with a carved sigil on his stump, a boy holding a rusted toy flamberge. They knew. They did not cheer. They did not kneel. But as Elias disappeared into the mist, their gazes followed, and the word passed quietly, from mouth to mouth, across every alley, chapel, and slum. Justice walks, not as a priest, not as a knight, but as a man marked by flame. Chapter 20. A New Hunt Begins. The wind howled through the Raikwald like a wounded beast, carrying with it the scent of rot and blood. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang once, then fell forever silent. Elias Krieg rode alone. His horse, Marrow, was lean and scarred, armored in studded leather and bone. His rider was no less fearsome, cloaked in a black duster stitched with purity runes scorched into the fabric, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face lined by war and time. His flamberge rested across his back, the blade etched now with old tongues and new runes, sigils not found in any sanctioned scripture. The Sigmarite seal was gone. In its place he wore a pendant forged from a fragment of the Liber Tenebris, not whole, not active, but bound in sanctified silver, locked with prayers of his own invention. It pulsed sometimes. But it obeyed. Elias had become what the Order feared most, a hunter with no master. The word had spread faster than any preacher's hymn. In Middenheim they spoke of the witch flame, a shadow who walked into a den of beastmen and walked out dragging their flayed chieftain behind him. In Talabicland they whispered of a man who uncovered a nest of Tzinchian, dream binders, and burned their minds alive before they could speak a single lie. In Sylvania there were darker rumors, that he had bargained with spirits in the dead woods, that he walked through the mists of the vampire courts unchallenged, that he never slept. He was called heretic, hero, nightmare, but always hunter. Now he followed the scent of something old, something buried beneath the ruins of an abbey desecrated during the age of 3 emperors. Cultists had returned there, new ones, emboldened by madness and faith twisted into hunger. Elias dismounted at the shattered archway. The abbey loomed before him, its stones blackened, its iconography replaced by crude symbols etched in blood, spirals that moved when no one looked, tongues drawn in endless loops. A dozen corpses hung from iron chains above the entrance, their skin peeled and folded into flowers. The smell was unbearable. He stepped inside. They came at him screaming, robed acolytes of the blissful maw, their nails replaced with obsidian, their faces carved into permanent smiles. One lunged. Elias shattered her jaw with the pommel of his blade, then gutted the next through the gut, twisting hard enough to sever the spine. Third cast a bolt of raw chaos. Elias raised his hand, runes flared, and the spell fizzled mid-air, drawn into the pendant he wore. He crushed the cultist's skull with a boot, fragments scattering like gravel. Further in, the altar pulsed. A preacher stood atop it, robed in a flayed priest's vestments, eyes burning with pink fire. "You walk a path between sin and salvation," the man crooned. "There is no return, only consumption." Elias answered with his flamberge. Steel met bone. They fought in a storm of blood and flame, glyphs igniting on Elias's blade as he chanted from memory, not scripture, but truths. Words forged in pain, sharpened in exile. The preacher howled, splitting open like a chrysalis. From within, something emerged, twisted, insectal, a demon of pleasure and decay fused into one abominable form. Elias did not hesitate. He called upon the pact. Runes ignited across his body. The air screamed. He drove the blade into the heart of the thing, and for a moment the world stopped. Then it burned. The abbey collapsed behind him. By morning, only ashes remained. Elias walked from the smoke, blood dripping from his blade, the sigils across his skin glowing faintly beneath his coat. He did not smile. He did not weep. He simply turned north. Another village had gone silent. Another shadow had taken root. And so the new hunt began. Not for gold, not for praise, but because the world was dying, and someone had to bleed to keep it breathing. And Elias Krieg, heretic, exile, hunter, bled better than most. The legend spread with the wind. Where the flame could not reach, the witch flame would.